In 1959, a man named Shiro Ishii died peacefully in a Tokyo hospital. He had a private medical practice, a loving family. He'd recently converted to Catholicism. By all appearances, he was an ordinary retired doctor living out his final years in quiet dignity. He was also responsible for the deaths of somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people. Not as a soldier, not in combat, as a scientist, running the largest and most brutal biological weapons program in human history. A program where living human beings, men, women, children, infants, were dissected alive, frozen, infected with plague, and used as test subjects for weapons that were then deployed on civilian cities. And here's the part that makes this story different from every other World War II atrocity you've heard about. Shiro Ishii was never charged with a single crime. Not one. Because the United States government made him a deal. Hand over your research and you walk free. Every scientist, every doctor, every person who held a scalpel over a screaming prisoner. All of them free. This is the story of Unit 731. To understand how something this extreme came to exist, you have to understand the man who built it. Shiro Ishii was born in 1892 in Chiba Prefecture, Japan, to a wealthy landowning family. He was brilliant, photographic memory, graduated from Kyoto Imperial University's medical program, and by every account from people who knew him, he was an absolutely insufferable human being. His classmates called him brash, abrasive, and arrogant. Colleagues said he was thoughtless toward equals, but obsessively flattering toward anyone above him. The kind of person who knows exactly how to climb a ladder. And climb he did. He married the university president's daughter, securing himself powerful connections. Then in 1928, he convinced the Japanese military to send him on a 2-year tour of 25 Western countries to study their biological research programs. He came back with a simple argument that changed everything. If so many nations signed a treaty banning biological weapons, he said, that means biological weapons must be devastatingly effective. And Japan needs them. It was a psychopath's logic, and the military loved it. In 1932, Japan invaded Manchuria and set up a puppet state called Manchukuo. This gave Ishii exactly what he needed, a lawless territory far from international scrutiny where he could do whatever he wanted. His first facility was built at a place called Jongma Fortress, about 100 kilometers south of the city of Harbin. It could hold up to 1,000 prisoners at a time. That facility lasted 3 years before a group of prisoners managed to break out during a thunderstorm. A man identified only as Lee overpowered a guard, grabbed the cell keys, and freed about 40 others. The storm had knocked out the electricity, which meant no searchlights and no electric fence. About 16 of them made it out. 10 were shot trying. The rest were recaptured and subjected to things that don't belong in a sentence with the word reprisal. The breakout embarrassed Ishii, but it didn't stop him. It just made him build something bigger, something escape-proof. In 1936, Unit 731 was officially established at its permanent home in the Pingfang district of Harbin. Its cover name was spectacularly boring on purpose, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. Nobody asked questions about water purification. The reality was a complex spanning 6 square kilometers, more than 150 buildings, research labs, prisons with walls thick enough to muffle screaming, factories capable of producing 1,000 kilograms of cholera bacteria per month, 300 kilograms of plague, 800 kilograms of typhoid, its own fleet of aircraft, an underground tunnel system for moving prisoners, and an incinerator that ran constantly. At its peak, over 3,000 staff worked at Pingfang, 52 surgeons, 49 engineers, over 1,000 combat medics, and this was just the main facility. Unit 731 was the hub of an entire network. Unit 100 in Changchun focused on animal diseases. Unit 1644 operated out of Nanjing. Unit 8604 ran out of Guangzhou. Unit 9420 worked across Southeast Asia. This wasn't a rogue operation. This was an industrial program. The people brought to Pingfang were called Maruta. It means logs, as in lumber. The facility's cover story was that it was a lumber mill, so the staff referred to killing prisoners the way you'd refer to cutting down trees. When a prisoner died, they'd say another log had been felled. Most of the victims were Chinese civilians. But the prisoner population also included Koreans, Mongolians, Russians, and Allied prisoners of war. Americans, British, Australians, Canadians. In January 1945, Unit 731 sent personnel to a POW camp in Shenyang holding over 2,000 Allied soldiers to conduct dysentery experiments on them. An American veteran named Frank James later described helping move dead POWs to autopsy tables where Japanese doctors removed their organs. No prisoner is known to have survived Unit 731. The mortality rate was 100%. Estimates of how many people went through the facility range from 3,000 to 12,000. The uncertainty exists because most of the records were deliberately destroyed. But what we do know from survivor testimony, perpetrator confessions, and documents that survived is enough. The experiments fell into categories, and every one of them is worse than the last. Vivisection, live surgical dissection, Prisoners would be deliberately infected with a disease, plague, cholera, anthrax, and then cut open while still alive to observe how their organs deteriorated at different stages of infection, often without anesthesia. A former army surgeon named Yuasa Ken later confessed that performing vivisections on Chinese captives was standard practice for army doctors. If you showed reluctance, you were called a traitor. One doctor described a case where a pregnant woman woke up during vivisection and said, "It's all right to kill me, but please spare my child's life." Think about that sentence for a second. Think about what kind of place you have to be in, what has already been done to you, for those to be the words you choose. Frostbite experiments. Led by a scientist named Yoshimura Hisato, prisoners had their arms submerged in tubs of ice water and held there until the limbs froze solid. Witnesses said that when you struck a frozen limb with a cane, it made the sound of a plank of wood. Yoshimura would then test rewarming methods: hot water, open flame, or just leaving the person overnight to see what happened. This research was meant to help Japanese troops survive Manchurian winters. The data was meticulous. The human cost was invisible in the spreadsheets. Biological weapons testing. Unit 731 weaponized at least 6 major pathogens: anthrax, typhoid, paratyphoid, glanders, dysentery, and plague. They developed specialized biodegradable bombs designed to house live rats and plague-infected fleas, engineered to burst midair and scatter their payload over populated areas. The facility maintained 4,500 flea incubators. Pressure chamber experiments. Prisoners were locked inside chambers where the air pressure was slowly reduced to simulate extreme altitude. Doctors recorded exactly how long a person could survive. In some cases, the pressure differential forced the victim's eyes from their sockets. Weapons testing. Prisoners were tied to stakes at various distances from explosives, grenades, shells, flamethrowers, so that doctors could study wound patterns and penetration depths on living bodies. And there was more. Injecting prisoners with animal blood, centrifuging people to death, injecting air bubbles into veins, burying prisoners alive, locking healthy prisoners in cells with diseased ones to watch how infection spread. This wasn't research in any meaningful sense. It was systematic torture with a lab coat on top. But Unit 731 wasn't just a laboratory. It was a weapons program, and those weapons were used. Between 1940 and 1942, Unit 731 conducted biological attacks on at least 11 Chinese cities. The method was simple and devastating. Planes would fly low over populated areas and drop plague-infected fleas mixed with wheat, rice, and cotton scraps. The contaminated materials would spread across neighborhoods. People would handle them unknowingly. Within days, plague would erupt. In October 1940, they hit the city of Ningbo. More than 100 people died within the first few days. In 1941, they targeted Changde in Hunan province. The resulting epidemic killed at least 7,600 people. In a detail that would almost be ironic if it weren't so grim, around 1,700 Japanese soldiers also died from their own biological weapons because they weren't adequately prepared for the blowback. The total death toll from Unit 731's field operations is estimated at 200,000 to 300,000 people. In 2002, a Tokyo district court formally ruled that Unit 731 had used bacteriological weapons against Chinese civilians. That's not disputed. That's a finding of fact from a Japanese court. Then the war ended. On August 9, 1945, the same day the United States dropped the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and sent the Red Army sweeping into Manchuria. Harbin was directly in their path. Ishii had maybe 72 hours. On August 10th, he issued orders to destroy everything. Every record was burned. Every piece of equipment was smashed. The remaining 300 or so prisoners were killed, gassed, or poisoned. 600 Chinese and Manchurian laborers who had worked at the facility were shot. The buildings were dynamited. Remains were burned in the courtyard. Then what was left of the bones was destroyed with explosives. On August 12th, Ishii himself flew out on a plane loaded with key research samples and select subordinates, bound for Japan. The cover-up had begun, and it was about to get help from an unlikely source. The United States sent investigators from Camp Dietrich, their own biological weapons facility in Maryland. The first was Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, who arrived in September 1945 and spent 9 weeks interviewing Japanese military personnel. He got nowhere. What he didn't know was that his own translator, a man named Ryoichi Naito, was a former Unit 731 member who was deliberately feeding him misleading information. Sanders only made progress when he bluffed, threatening to bring in the Soviets if the Japanese didn't cooperate. The next morning, they suddenly produced documents. Nearly 40 years later, in a 1983 interview, Sanders admitted he had been deceived the entire time. More investigators followed. In 1947, a civilian scientist from Camp Dietrich named Norbert Fell finally got Ishii to admit that human experiments had taken place. And this is where the story takes its ugliest turn. Because instead of arresting Ishii, the United States offered him a deal: full immunity from prosecution. For Ishii, for every scientist, for every doctor, for every person involved. In exchange, the US would get exclusive access to all of Unit 731's research data, the disease progression studies, the weapons delivery systems, the mass production techniques for pathogens, the frostbite data, all of it. General Douglas MacArthur personally authorized the arrangement. Direct cash payments were made to Unit 731 doctors from a secret US Army fund, between 150,000 and 200,000 yen. And the justification? It came in a report from Camp Dietrich's Dr. Edwin Hill, who wrote what might be the most coldly damning sentence in the history of American intelligence. Such information could not be obtained in our own laboratories because of scruples attached to human experimentation. Read that again. He's saying, we can't do this ourselves because we have morals. But since someone else already did it, we might as well use the results. And to use the results, we need to protect the people who created them. The United States then actively suppressed the truth. They withdrew evidence from the Tokyo war crimes trials. They classified all documentation related to the deal. And when the Soviet Union held its own war crimes trial in Khabarovsk in December 1949, prosecuting 12 Japanese officers with 18 volumes of evidence, the United States dismissed the entire proceeding as Soviet propaganda. Historians have since concluded that the Khabarovsk trial findings were remarkably accurate. But at the time, the Cold War was more important than justice. The 12 defendants were found guilty and sentenced to between 2 and 25 years. All surviving defendants were released by 1956. So what happened to the scientists? Shiro Ishii opened a private medical clinic. He reportedly offered free treatments to his neighbors. He kept a diary that made no mention of his wartime activities. He died of throat cancer in 1959 at the age of 67 in a hospital in Tokyo, a free man. Masashi Kitano, who commanded Unit 731 from 1942 to 1945, co-founded the Green Cross Corporation, Japan's first commercial blood bank and a major pharmaceutical company. He served as its president. Ryoichi Naito, the translator who deceived the American investigators, founded the Japan Blood Bank, which became the direct predecessor to Green Cross. He built a career in post-war medicine while sitting on the secret of what he had helped cover up. Yoshimura Hisato, the man who froze prisoners' limbs and recorded what happened when you hit them with a stick, became president of Kyoto Prefectural University of Medicine. He published papers based on his wartime frostbite research in 1951 and 1952, but left out any mention of how the data was obtained. He denied performing deadly experiments until the day he died. There's one more detail about Green Cross Corporation that's worth knowing. In the 1980s, the company, founded by former Unit 731 members, was at the center of a scandal in which up to 3,000 Japanese people contracted HIV through contaminated blood products the company had distributed. The arc of Unit 731's legacy managed to keep producing victims decades after the war ended. The truth about Unit 731 was suppressed for roughly 4 decades. It wasn't until the 1980s that it began reaching Western audiences, through a 60 Minutes segment in 1982, a British documentary in 1985, and congressional hearings in the mid-80s. In 1994, historian Sheldon Harris published Factories of Death after nearly a decade of research. And around the same time, former Unit 731 members themselves began participating in a traveling exhibition across Japan, publicly confessing to what they had done for the first time. As for Japan's official position, in 2002, the Tokyo District Court acknowledged that Unit 731 conducted biological warfare against Chinese civilians, but it denied compensation to the 180 Chinese plaintiffs who brought the case. As of today, the Japanese government has never issued a specific apology for Unit 731. In April 2018, the National Archives of Japan released the names of 3,607 unit members. The museum at Pingfang still stands on the grounds of the original facility. You can visit it. You can walk through what's left of the buildings where these things happened. There's a question that sits underneath this entire story, and it's not the obvious one. The obvious question is, how could human beings do this to other human beings? That question has been asked about every atrocity in history, and the answer is always some version of the same thing: dehumanization, ideology, obedience, distance. The prisoners were logs. The work was research. The facility was water purification. The harder question is what happened afterward, because the scientists who did this didn't just escape punishment. They prospered. They built companies. They ran universities. They were respected members of society. And the government that positioned itself as the moral authority of the post-war world, the country that prosecuted Nazis at Nuremberg and helped establish the very concept of crimes against humanity, looked at Unit 731's data and decided the information was more valuable than the justice. That's not a failure of one country or one moment. That's a window into how power actually works when nobody's watching. And if there's a reason to remember Unit 731, beyond honoring the people who suffered and died there, it's this. The line between civilization and barbarism isn't as thick as we'd like to believe. And sometimes the people responsible for enforcing that line are the same ones quietly erasing it.